Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 496th episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Mason, joined by my co-host, Abe Stein. Abe, how you doing?
I am doing fantastic, Mason. How was coverage over the weekend?
It was really awesome. I got to commentate my first RC, had a great time doing that with Niall, got to cover some really exciting rounds and some really innovative decks. How many people get to say they covered, Martyr Proc Control at an RC? Very few. And I got to do it twice. So, it's a good time.
That's sick. Sad I couldn't make it on the coverage. I probably should have just, done more winning. But, it is what it is.
It is what it is. But we'll go over your RC experience later in the show. But first, we do need to be doing Always Improving. Abe, that is the main point of the show. And you were gone last week. How are you always improving?
So, there's a lot of things that I did over last week that, come under this. But the one that I want to talk about the most is I actually just read a really, really good book on my way to and from the RC over the weekend. It's called How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell. And it's a book about, redefining and reclaiming the idea of, productivity and how you use your time. And it was a really, eye-opening experience reading this book about kind of how it is we think and devote our attention and the value in retaining control over that and using that as a means for, being the person you want to be rather than in this context in the book, what maybe, social media platforms and algorithms that, companies use want us to be. And it just really has me thinking a lot about how I use my attention and then also how that can apply to Magic, a core thing that I know I've talked about a lot over the last 9 months on the show has been working on a process and devoting my time in ways that are more acutely focused. And that really resonated throughout, kind of the struggles of that, of having less time is really, it's not necessarily time, but attention that I could serve to have more of sometimes when I'm playing. If you're playing games unfocused without paying attention, you really miss things, or if you're in a space where you're not able to pay full attention to the games you're playing, what's the quality of that experience for you? And so I've been reflecting a lot on those things, and it's been a lot to really chew on in the back of my head. I would definitely recommend it to anyone who listens to the show to give the book a read. So, but yeah, I've just been thinking about that one a lot.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that out. Sounds very interesting. My always improving moment comes from really diving into the new standard format. I'm playing the Chicago 75K at the Magic Con while Abe's busy winning the Pro Tour that weekend. So, we'll just get it from all angles, But jokes aside, I really wanted to explore and try things out with the Convoke deck because it seems very powerful right now in standard. And it's been really good. And I've just been playing it a lot and iterating and changing things up. And it's something that I don't normally do a ton of personally, where, a lot of times I play a little bit and I think a lot, but I've just been playing a lot of the actual Convoke deck and changing up cards constantly and trying different configurations of the deck, different mana bases, really diving deep into the format and seeing what's going on there. And it's been a good improving moment of a lot of my strengths, a lot of the deep knowledge I have on stuff really lends itself to mid-range, basically every archetype but aggro. I think I can play aggressively slanted decks well and do that sort of thing, but they're definitely the ones I have the least experience with. So actually getting my hands on and figuring out okay, how does this deck play? How do I feel about it? Etc. has been really eye-opening and helpful. And in a lot of ways, understanding cards like the case of the Gateway Express really lets you play a kind of a tempo-y game. If you play a bunch of those in Witchstalker Frenzies was really eye-opening and opened up whole new sideboard plans and configurations of the deck, where at one point, Abe, I had 7 of those basically 2 mana Doom Blades that allowed me to push my advantage, and that was really strong against things like Rakdos. And so it was a really interesting experience trying to do that and trying to learn that way. And it's not something I normally do, and so it was good just to get more actual hands-on with the deck.
Yeah, I think both those cards you mentioned are really good examples of cards that, when people, at least when I've talked to people about most of the Convoke deck, honestly, and Pioneer being legal in, with the exception of a worse, not having the same mana base with the same amount of reach, just in the lands you play, has been that, it's just it's all the same stuff. It's really good, but you get a lot of options for things that don't have real convoke, right? Like Witchstalker Frenzy has convoke by attacking. You know, the case you're talking about, like,
Gateway Express.
has Case Gateway Express has an ability that counts for the number of creatures you have in play, and then also like pumps your team if you meet the conditions. So it's just a really, really cool way of also, I imagine there could be a time pretty easily where, like, let's say Sheoldred gets really, really big in Pioneer again, or there's some X5 creature that really shuts down things and Convoke is a playable deck again. Like, Witchstalker Frenzy could move to top of the list of cards that you want to be playing, and you might know that from having, like, jammed all these games instead. And I think when it comes to preparing for, like, a huge tournament like the 75K in Chicago, no matter what archetype you play, really understanding not just the breadth of the format and like the positioning of things, but really having a deep knowledge from having played with all the configurations you can think of that are like worth getting into with any archetype is a really, really big leg up. That's something that I took away from Alex Madgelton's PT Top 8 at, I think it was PT Guilds of Ravnica, with like the Experimental Frenzy red deck. It was like Experimental Frenzy Gruul or something. And he talked about in his tournament report, is like, the only thing I did differently in this event than others was I played just every deck a ton and did all the things I normally do. And I think that, like, it's really a valuable thing to, like, even though the process of, like, it's good to have the macro theory process, when you really do tune it up with playing as much as it sounds like you are, you get some really great results.
Yeah, I'm excited. Also, as a side note here before we put it away, did you know the case of the Gateway Express has the creature do the damage? So, like, if you have Death Touch, you kill it with just one. Lifelink, you gain a life. And, like, let's say I had 3 creatures and you have an X3 and I play it, you cut down 1, I don't kill your thing.
Oh, interesting. But, like, if you were to cut down my Death Toucher, like, you'd cut down my 1, but I had a Death Toucher, I gave my thing Death Touch, your thing would still die?
Correct, yeah. Like
oh, that's really
all those, there's a lot of weird things with this card where it's like and when you read it too, it reads that way, but I think a lot of people's brain just reads do damage equal to the number of creatures you have. That's really what it says, right? But it says literally those creatures do the damage.
Yeah, each creature you control deals 1 damage to the creature. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I haven't figured out how to use that in Standard. Like, obviously, if I was playing different colors, I could have, like, you know, a black-white deck where, you know, like, there's a sacrifice deck and you like Death Touch something or Lifelink, you know, get a little extra value. But it's just something to keep in mind, and, you know, I don't know. That card and that deck is really good. But we're going to talk more about that next week when it comes to Standard. But before we get into our main topic of talking about the RC, I do want to give a quick shout-out to our sponsor, Heavy Play. You can go to heavyplay.com and use code CCMTG to get 10% off. I recently kind of went and looked at some of the products, and, you know, I'm a big lover of, like, their deck boxes and stuff like that, and I just wanted to make sure that listeners knew, because I didn't realize there was 2 different types of games for the deck boxes, Abe. That's something that I didn't understand because I was just given them all, you know, as you were, like, a care package from them to, like, give us and try it out. I personally use the normal one. There's, like, it's like Heavy Play Deck Case, I think is the name, and then there's Heavy Play Deck Case Max. Both are good. You know, I'm happy to have them, but the normal one is the one that I use a lot of, and I just wanted to make sure that I was making that clear for listeners, because some of the other things can be a little pricey because these are high-quality materials, and there's, like, nice magnets, and everything's really sturdy and really reliable. Really love the Heavy Play products, but they can be a bit pricey, and I just wanted to make sure that I was letting listeners know they have a product that I was using when I'm using their, you know, storage material.
So which one is the one with the like wraparound magnet?
The one where you, like, flip the case? That's the Max.
Okay, yeah. So I was going to say, kind of segueing into talking about my RC, what we're talking about next. I actually used this event as my first opportunity to really play with and use some of the materials in the wild. I didn't use, like, the playmat and stuff because I'm just a traditionalist. I like my playmat, and I have sentimental value with it. I like having it rolled up in my bag. I'm calling me old school, whatever. It's just not, like, the whole, like, flat iPad, like, feeling, like, big mat. Not for me. But I used the rounded sleeves and the like smaller size of the deck box max, and I am in love with the deck box, and I might be falling for the sleeves too, because there's one thing that I don't think I really realized until I was perfect fitting my deck with the, like, rounded perfect fits as well, I've never had a deck, I don't know if you've done this yet, Mason, but I've never had a deck double sleeved as easily as the rounded sleeves with the rounded perfect fits.
Yeah, I actually, it's so funny. The first event I used them for was at SCG, and I changed decks. So I was gonna play like the Esper control deck, and I switched over, and I had to re-double sleeve my deck in one day, and it was actually so easy to change everything. And I had a friend over at my house, and they were helping me do it, and it was just like, wow, this is actually so easy. And it was funny that you mentioned that because it was actually the easiest one I've ever done to like double sleeve and like move my deck around and everything, including the like double sleeve part where I moved over like the cards that were double sleeved.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that alone is a ring endorsement of the sleeves. There's a lot of players that I did play against did ask me about when they like noticed or whatever. I've been playing against someone else who had them, a listener of the show. We played, I think, late on day one, but they also had them, and we were like, yeah, they're pretty sweet. So shout out to you for being a fellow rounded sleeve truther. Hopefully, you get more. Use the code CCMTG and check out for your 10% off. Anywho,
I want to say really quick since we're talking about the sleeves because I feel like we don't bring them up enough. When you use the sleeves, you need to be very careful when you're shuffling, and you need to like not be super aggressive. Is what I would say. They are still rounded, which like I personally really like the way they shuffle and is great. But it does mean like you need to be a little bit careful. And I've seen some people have some frustration because of the way they shuffle. And I think it's different for everybody. And you just need to be like understanding that like you're having a little bit of care when you shuffle, but it's not so much that you're like being like delicate with it, right? Like I'm sure you can attest to that. Like you probably shuffled normally, but you also aren't someone that's like aggressively like riffling and like flicking the cards incredibly fast. You know what I mean? Just I was wanted to have a moment to talk about that because I saw a lot of people talking about that over the course of the weekend on social media.
Yeah. I actually had my first, I had 4 or 5 breaks. I was hitting the corners together too hard when I was shuffling, and once I eased up, I had no problems. They were really great. And, talking to the people at the booth there this weekend, they were, super receptive to all this feedback, really just excited to hear people talking about using the product and stuff, too.
Tell me about your RC experience this weekend. That's the point of this week's show. We're going to talk about your experience, talk about the RC Denver in general, a little bit modern, but I want to hear about your time at the RC.
Let's see. My RC was pretty stock. I played stock Rhinos after quite a bit of deliberation. Didn't really have a ton of time to work on a hammer list like I talked about maybe doing a couple weeks ago. Just because stuff in my personal life. And also the positioning of the metagame because of the Yawgmoth deck. It was just, there were too many problems to solve for it, so I wound up going with tried and true Rhinos. Only change I really made from stock was that we played, me and my friend Joel played the exact same 75 after working on it for most of the week. We played 22 lands and cut a Blood Moon effect from the sideboard to kind of still fit in everything we wanted by moving one of the 3 Flame of Venors into that slot. And the deck just felt really, really good, honestly. The matches I lost to Yawgmoth, where their hand contained exactly a Yawgmoth, Hapatra, and Shieldred. And I got them down to 2 life exactly, so they were able to combo me by having the Yawgmoth in play, and then casting the Hapatra and Shieldred to combo off and end the game. I lost to just mulliganing a lot in a mirror match where I just never had a chance. I lost a Nailbiter to Merfolk, and then another mirror match where I just got outdrawn and to Yawgmoth. So it was kind of how I felt like tournament could go. I think Rhinos is that kind of deck where you're signing up for. Sometimes your odds just can get beat, especially in the mirror match. There are things you can do to maneuver, but in some of the games you just get got. And definitely with a deck like Rhinos where you kind of are mulliganing aggressively, sometimes it just doesn't come together. I will say that there were some really cool archetypes out there I played against. I played against 2 different builds of Blue-Black Shadow. One with kind of a scam package, Dauthi Void Walkers, and then some Drown in the Lock and cheap blue counter magic, and Murktide Regent. The other one, more of a counterspell Death Shadow deck. Both really, really interesting. I played some sweet games against that one where I got my crashing. I saw they had Surgical Extraction in their sideboard. So I had to keep hands in games 2 and 3 that had Crashing Footfalls to be suspended. So that way when I went and was fighting over the Cascaded ones, I still had a chance of having one in exile to then rebuy with my Endurances. So it was a really, really cool song and dance in a lot of the games. I feel like people talk down. A lot of people I talk to who chose not to play Rhinos or just played different decks or didn't want to play Rhinos specifically because the kind of deck it is, really discounted how much play there was to it. And I really felt like I had a really good time playing and maneuvering the games. I had some really, really interesting spots, especially against the like outsides of the format, as well as I really benefited from taking the time with my friend Jarvis Yu, friend of the show, who was playing Yawgmoth and also playing against some games against Zachary Keeney, who was playing Yawgmoth in the tournament, to just like really understand the positions that mattered in that matchup. And it paid off. So I played against Yawg, I think, like 5 or 6 times in the tournament. It was the deck I played against the most. And yeah, I think that, you know, the way the tournament played out, obviously Rhinos won, but it was just the most played deck. And for the reason of, as we've been talking about for a couple weeks now, it just kind of has a good matchup spread against the rest of the top of the metagame. I didn't really play against many decks that were dedicated to like their game plan coming into the tournament was like, I'm going to have a good Rhinos matchup, like people playing Living End or things like that. I learned some really cool things on the fly. Like I played against Amulet Titan. You might know this, Mason. That have you ever tried to plan playing Amulet versus Rhinos where you just don't cast spells and just chain sagas?
I have done it like once, basically, I think. Where I just like had the hard read they had a cell to or whatever, and I just made constructs and put a shot, like, just made them big. Is that what you're talking about? Like, I don't.
Yeah. So my opponent.
Actually, I don't think I've ever done.
I played against. I played against a Rhinos, or sorry, I played against a Amulet opponent who, like, played a turn 2 saga, made a construct, got a mapped for saga, like wasn't putting anything on the stack that I would want to fight over, but was constantly threatening it once they had an Amulet in play, or like had the saga ticking up to be able to do that. And I just couldn't get through because all of a sudden my opponent had like 5/5 saga tokens and was like beating me down. I had to start spending my Tidebinders and stuff on like chapter 2s to try to keep it under control. And it was just really interesting. Like I'd never seen a player take that approach, and it felt really strong. And I was like definitely back against the wall there going into games 2 and 3 because it was an approach I had not seen and didn't know, even though I knew conventional wisdom was for them to take out their sagas against Rhinos, that like they might stick to that plan. I think if they had in game 3, they probably would have got me because I didn't import in things like Force of Vigor, or they would have had a chance to, but I was able to squeak that one out. But yeah, I went up like 4-0 to, I mean, it was either 3-0 or 4-0 to like X2 to having it locked up in the last round, losing to Merfolk, and then needing a 5-0 on day 2 to make the Pro Tour again and chain the invites. And then I just like lost Rhino's Mirror, lost the next one to be Dead for Cash, played out the rest because I was really enjoying myself. Like as much as kind of this is the last, like could be the last event where Modern really looks like this, that people are going to be playing on a large scale because of the release of Modern Horizons 3. It was just still a really, really fun time playing the format, and I just had a blast. I also got to watch my friend, big shout out to Andrew Vorel, who made top 4 with his 5-color creativity deck. Lost playing for the World's Invite to the eventual winner. And yeah, I mean, the whole thing was just a real roller coaster, and it was great to just see, as always, see so many people, meet a couple of listeners, you know, get to play some high-level Magic and see a lot of the faces of, I'm not going to say yesteryear, we're not that far removed from like those times, but see a lot of the faces, but also for the first time in a long time experience really like murmurs and mourning of kind of like innovations at the tournament, like the Leyline Rhinos deck, and kind of like building out plans for that once we'd already submitted deck lists and started to see that it was like a thing. So yeah, it was just all in all like a really, really sweet tournament. You know, not at all upset with, you know, a 144th place or whatever it is I got. I didn't even check like X5 at the RC, and you know, it wasn't my day on day 2, but overall felt really, really good about how I played and really good about the format. I don't know what your perspective was on a lot of the things going on towards the top tables since you were doing coverage, but that was kind of just, you know, an RC through the eyes of a Rhinos player. Deck was just really good, and if you have any Modern events coming up, I would still implore you to play it. It looks like the results from around the world over the weekend said about the same thing too. Rhinos is just good.
Yeah, it was interesting, like from the booth perspective, because I covered rounds 1 through 3 and then 13, 14, which are the beginning rounds and the win-it-in rounds. So, like, we started off the day watching LSV play Domain Rhinos, for example. That was, like, how it started, and it looked very impressive. And then I didn't really see Rhinos anymore because we tried to use the rest of the early rounds to highlight stuff. And then, Rhinos did ultimately end up winning the tournament, and we saw one match, I guess, of Twinless Twin versus Min, who was the eventual winner. We saw their winning in, but the rest of our matches, because we covered like 2 a round, they were all like controlling decks. Like we saw Mullins bring like Lutri, we watched that in round 1, and I think he ultimately ended up going like X4 or something like that.
He also X5'd, yeah.
X5'd, okay, yeah. So like, he didn't end up having the tournament he wanted to have, but like did kind of well. And then like we saw Jody Keith play the Martyr control deck, and then like we watched a 4-color mirror where like one was more mid-rangey and one was very like control counterspell heavy, like I like, and like we saw that kind of stuff, and not a whole lot else, just because like those were the matches that we like were able to cover because everyone else kind of like had clean draw ends, It was like, okay, well, these are the ones that we can watch. So I have a weird perspective on it from that angle. And then, just being transparent, after I got done on Saturday, I went and worked out and then went to a local cube night down here at my LGS. And so I didn't really get to see much more of Saturday. So I didn't get to see a lot of like what the viewers saw in that regard, because I just had a busy day on Saturday. But I know that my big takeaway from the event, looking at everything, is like Rhinos is good. That is for sure true. It looks like Domain Rhinos is incredibly strong. It won the 10K that happened the next day on Sunday. It had a very good win rate. You could argue that like people like LSV played it, and that's gonna like make its win rate stronger or whatever than it's supposed to. But even if you like, I don't know, you account for the LSV factor in my head, still seems to be as good, if not better, than Teamer Rhinos. So I think, at worst, it looks to be like a reasonable deck. And to me, Yawgmoth still seems like the deck I would tell you to play. You have to figure out how to play against the Teamer Rhinos matchup. But watching like Zerk play that matchup, and like a couple other people, and like talking to some people and coaching and preparing for it, I think that there are just things that a lot of people aren't doing, like not activating your wall roots unless like you have something that actually matters, then like getting something down sooner matters, and then just like setting up to like play your dog, sack something and proliferate right away, and doing that kind of stuff I think really matters a lot. And the matchup is like not good for you, but it is, I think, a little overblown after seeing some stuff. And also I think a lot of Yawgmoth players just did it kind of wrong this weekend, when it came to their decks. This was a thing that like there was a lot of debate about and talk about among players, and like I know I'm personally in the camp of like 23 lands, 22 if you don't count Dryad Arbor. I think it's possible you're supposed to be playing Ignoble Hierarch again. I saw Pardee and Matt Nass do it. I think it made sense that like this is probably the worst weekend for Bowmasters outside of the Mirror. And I think just also they had a really clean mana base too. I don't know if you were able to see their decks and look at it. That was one thing from coverage, was kind of looking at that stuff. And they just like went and cut a lot of the nonsense lands, like Nurturing Peatland, Takanuma, Twilight Mire, and just played 8 fetches and 2 Mortuary Mires. And just had those 2 Surveil lands, and just like, we're like, hey, we're playing a lot of lands. We're going to trim, our like Fulminator Mage tech weirdo spot and just play another land because our deck needs the mana. And I thought that was really smart. And so I think there's a lot of really cool stuff. I think Insidious Roots was pretty good in their deck too, which was like something I was a little skeptical of, that I thought it might be asking too much of you. But I think just kind of having one opens up a lot of lines, just like Hapatra does. So I don't know, that was kind of my view on the RC.
Yeah, I mean, to go a little bit deeper on the like Yogg v Rhino stuff, because like I said, I played against a lot of times, and I did like a decent amount of talking and thinking about the matchup before the tournament. That was like a lot of my night prior work outside of figuring out my sideboard plans. We're figuring out like our 15th card at 5 p.m. before decklist submission. Is that like the matchup is good for Rhinos, but it's like the same way that the maybe not Hammer, yeah, maybe it is like Hammer v Murktide was, where like the game starts in Rhino's advantage if both decks are having their plan A, because like having Rhinos on turn 3 does put a ton of pressure on the Yogg opponent. But Yogg has like 2 states in which I believe they're very far ahead. One is if they have a Grist resolved plus and then are untapping with it and the insect token. If they're doing that, then they are, like, I would say very much in the driver's seat, and it's going to take Rhinos fighting uphill to try to turn that game around. And B is having a Yawgmoth and 2 creatures and have Yawgmoth resolve almost no matter what the board is, unless it's like on the draw on turn 4 into like double Rhinos or something like that. And otherwise, like, if the Rhinos player stumbles at all, can't answer a halfling, has outburst on turn 3, but maybe not shardless, or like doesn't even have a way to make Rhinos on turn 3, then I think Yawgmoth is very able to take the game. Like, you almost need to do that for Rhinos. The impetus is on Rhinos to do that because they have no other game plan, whereas the fail rate on Yogg, I think, is much higher. So the thing I was going to ask you is, so I don't normally track my die rolls, but it happened to me that I won 4 die rolls in 14 rounds. I lost 10. Now, in those 10 matches I was on the draw, Mason, I spent 5 of them in game 1 with a Gemstone Caverns in play on turn 1 with a luck counter.
Nice.
How many die rolls did I win?
You only won 4, but you won in deck building 5 times.
I just couldn't figure out, like, because I didn't win my first die roll until maybe around 7. So it was like comical walking around being like, guys, I lost the die roll again. Also, I had my Gemstone Caverns. After I'd like spent the night, like the day before, building my mana base, being like, can I cut this Gemstone Caverns? Like, how often is it going to happen? And then it just happened a lot. It was really, really, really good. And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, well, they call it a luck counter for a reason, right?
Yeah. I mean, I lost the die roll in my first round, and my opponent, like, playing Blue Black Shadow, like, keep 7. I look at my hand with a Gemstone Caverns. I'm tanking about what card I'm going to bin. I'm like, yeah, I'll keep. And they're like, they call, like, during the player announcement, they call, like, no. You didn't win that die roll. I stole it from you. And then we were off the races. So it's like, I don't know. I just don't know how many die rolls I won or lost. If you have opinions, listeners, leave them in the comments. But there was that. I do think that, like, as the format moves forward, though, on a more serious note, outside of my die rolls, like the 4-color Rhinos decks, I think that one of the things that helped out my friend Andy with his creativity deck and getting to like making it into the top 8, he like came in at X2 on day 2 and then just like won 6 matches in a row to make top 4, was that he played against the Leyline Rhinos deck a little bit more than the regular Rhinos deck. And I think that because kind of the strength of the Rainbow Rhinos deck is to have better threats that come down sooner at the cost of interaction, especially when, like, Archon Trigger does not care about the hexproof that Scion gives. That is a pretty real vulnerability of the way the deck is built right now, that I think it has an issue with, like, being a little bit softer to, like, those decks, and it wouldn't surprise me too much if creativity continued to be on an uptick because of that. I think also after watching Andy's matches and hearing him talk about them, I underestimated kind of the weird games you play. I often had thought about the creativity deck in like you're kind of like, ABC, playing your game out and then like comboing off, like, getting Archons into play. And I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. The amount of times I heard him telling stories about games where he just, like, Emblem the Renin 6, or, like, had his opponent stuck under Teferi, long enough to then like do that, or just Hardcast Archon, and those games like coming up and happening, I didn't really appreciate until like, you know, talking over his tournament with him to understand, like hear the stories and everything of how he made top 8 and getting that perspective. And I think it gave me a new like appreciation for the positioning of creativity in this format.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I could see there still being room for things to change as these decks become known quantities, and things like Living End, you know, kind of wax and wane. The Cascade decks like are good and then bad, or I guess like, you know, get hated out more or less. Yeah, it was just something else that I ran into. I thought was or like that was floating around my head after this event, with so much unknown and with so much innovation around like just some of the new cards popping up in their most powerful applications. Like what it means for Modern moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is an interesting place to be. Here's a question for you. I tweeted this yesterday, and it got some people talking, and I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. My big thought was, I remember people used to just have Scion of Draco in their Rhinos deck, right? Like that was just a thing people did back during the Yorion days. Everyone was like, "Oh, it wasn't really good enough," but like those were the Yorion days where like Fury was around too. And I always just wonder if like you're talking about like a hole in the game right now of the Rhinos deck, the domain one is like how it can't cover certain things. It's like, well, what if it just stopped trying to high roll with Draco and just played Draco as like, hey, I am a more like aggressive Rhinos deck, and I don't like worry about like, you know, having all the interaction, but I still have a bit more than the like 5-color Leyline builds do. Do you think there's anything to that, or do you think I'm kind of just like, nah?
I think you need the Leyline for like, I think without Leyline, Scion is like not worth playing, because if it doesn't have hexproof, it's just not good.
Mm-hmm.
Like the real value in having it is having the 5-color Scion just be like an unkillable, unbeatable, unraceable threat in the mirrors. And I think that was a lot of the strength of the deck, was that it just put people to the test of, here is a card you cannot kill. All the cards you normally played against your Scion of Draco do not work because it has hexproof until you kill the Leyline. So you have to like, and you can't kill them both at once. Like you can't force to figure me out of this. You have to like force or besage you or whatever effect my enchantment, and then get my thing. And then also all the other creatures I have also have a rainbow of abilities. And as much as I personally don't like structurally the way that deck is built, I just don't like decks that are really trying to high roll openers all too much. As much as I was just talking about Gemstone Cavern saving me like 5 out of 10 matches.
We played Mono Green for like 6 months in Pioneer, and
whoa! That deck was just good and consistent. It was not. That's not a high roll mulliganing deck. This is like the difference between playing like Dredge and playing, or maybe playing like a deck like Dredge Vine and playing a deck like Dredge.
Sure.
Playing a deck like Dredge, your game plan is consistent, and you're doing, you have like a lot of cards that function in the same way, and you have like your whole game plan and a lot of your slots taken up by cards that let you do that. Versus something where it's like, okay, I just need to have an opener where I'm gonna hopefully flip the cards I need, and then like do the thing. It's gonna be really powerful in the short term. Where I feel like with this Leyline Rhinos deck, just structurally, I didn't get a chance to play with it, but looking at it, I fear for just, you're really banking on Scion plus Leyline to be like another kind of free win situation, as, you know, I have Rhinos on turn 3 with force backup or whatever it is that makes Rhinos free wins happen.
All right, I think that's fair. It's reasonable. I was just curious, you know. There's a thing that isn't so clear to me, but is believable when talking to people about it, you know?
Yeah, I think if Leyline binding got better, I could see a world where that's the case. Sure. Or like you play like, maybe not 4 Leylines, but you play like 1 or 2 as like a rainbow pitchable that might turn on your Scions. But it would also have to be a world where the removal is not good against Scion. Like you want to be able to play Scion and Leyline binding, and you need more threats, and like maybe Murktide region isn't good, so you want to be able to like fetch Triomes. I think also the Surveil lands, you touched on it with Yawgmoth and like Matt Nass and Sam Pardee rebuilding their mana base to have more Surveil lands. I played 2 Surveillance in Rhinos, and they were so good. Like that deck, a little bit of card selection goes a long way because you have like next to none.
Mm-hmm.
And I would not be surprised if those lands continue to be like they start to get adopted in Pioneer, like in the place of some of the cycling lands. Even I wouldn't be surprised if just like finding a way to play 1 or maybe 2, depending on the deck, in most modern decks, especially like most fetch land modern decks, just becomes the norm. It was very impressive in seeing a lot of them around. Wasn't necessarily like, it didn't feel surprising to see so many adopted, but how good it was and how much it made certain decks, and especially Rhinos for me, feel a lot more consistent than I had been used to in the games we were testing before them, was really, really remarkable.
Yeah, I think Rhinos is a weird case of like, it does so little in the early turns, right? And then also in the late game appreciates the surveil so much. You know what I mean? More like when you're like looking for a specific thing, like you said, there's so little of it. I do think that like it is a thing where you need to be adding lands to your deck, or like you need to not be reducing the number of untapped lands you have. I think is what I basically would say, right? Like this is the thing I've heard people talk about. It's just like, oh, turn a shock into a surveil, basically. And I think that is not the way I would go about it. But if you're like wanting to take one of your weird flex slots out of Murktide and just be like, I'm going up a land, you know what I mean? I think that is something. And it's funny, you know, Twinless Twin, actually, we were, Max, we were watching his win in, and Abe, he had the perfect hand. It was like Ragavan and, you know, Spell Pierces and Flusters and, you know, some Preordains and like another threat and the Surveil land. And he was on the play and just had to mulligan. You know, and he went up a land. He was at 19 instead of 18, which is like the right way to do things. So like in a world where he wasn't playing that land, it just would have been an obvious mulligan. You know what I mean? Like he would have no lands.
Yeah.
But I do think there's something to be said about like it is filling kind of this half role of like, I am a land that like, because being a tap land is a cost in Modern, right? Like in the early turns, for lots of decks. But for Rhinos, it is not. And for Living End, you know, like I think that deck often really wants a lot of mana, and which is a weird thing to say about it, but like it kind of does. And like taking your worst cycler and taking whichever the worst one is and making it a, you know, surveil land, I think goes a long way in that deck.
Yeah, I mean, I know Jacob Nagro was talking on Twitter about he initially was very strongly against playing surveil lands, and then by the end of the tournament he was like, I could see the merit in 1, but he still wasn't like entirely sold. And his opinion carries a lot of weight to me. He's a very, very, very good player. But it's really true that, you know, like maybe it's like cut your Otawara rather than, or like cut your whatever last canters, maybe like your 4th Bauble if you're low on Bauble in Murktide or something. Or for me, like I said in my Rhino 75, we cut a Blood Moon effect from the sideboard to move one of the 2 Flame Venors to the sideboard instead of it, to play a 20-second land in the main deck to have the Surveil lands, like, and have 2 of them, because it was just so good to not only fetch them early, but fetch them on your 4th turn, because you really, all your stuff costs 3 or 2. Mm-hmm. So, like, your 4th mana coming into play tap was really okay. And surveilling once you knew how your Rhino situation went out, especially in the post-board games, was just very, very strong. So, yeah, I just think those things are here to stay, and finding out how to kind of restructure the decks to play them is going to be a bit of a challenge, but it's definitely like, you know, maybe not exactly 1-to-1 with like a Canopy land, depending on your deck. Like Fiery Islet can do things Surveil Land can't do, but a Surveil Land can do things like that Fiery Islet can't do, like get fetched. So it's a really interesting balancing act.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's going to do it for the RC proper today. Abe, unless there's anything you really wanted to talk about here before we headed out.
No, I think that's really all of it. It was kind of relieving to feel good about my deck choice and feel good about how I played after really having my time divided between, you know, real life stuff and this event and, you know, the upcoming Pro Tour. like with Limited and Pioneer on my brain, and so it was kind of just would have been nice to do better, but I can't really be unhappy with the result, and I feel like I played really well. So it was actually pretty affirming to feel like, okay, even though I have all this stuff on my plate, I'm still staying sharp, and if not, playing even like a little bit better than I was. If I looked at an event this time 12 months ago, I feel like I was playing a bit sharper maybe than I even was then. So it's been a good feeling. It was a good event, and onward to the PT for me.
Awesome. Love it. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg. That's where you become a patron of the show, and you get a couple of benefits. There's a Discord, a lot of people are talking, and another one is you get to ask Patreon questions like this one. And our Patreon question is, what is our favorite card from Murders at Karlov Manor? Abe, I'm going to let you go first. I'm going to ban us from saying the Surveil lands.
Okay, I'm going to pull up the...
Okay, well, since Abe's pulling up, I'll talk for a second. I'll have that one. Since I
can't talk about I just don't want to bring up my favorites from...
Pioneer?
From the set review.
Oh, sure. That's fair. I'll say this. The case of the Gateway Express has been my favorite one so far. That, in case of the Crimson Pulse, I think I somehow shorthanded to they all sacrificed themselves when you got it solved. And so I just read those cards and just read it as oh, you play the case, it kills something, you attack, it sacks, and all your guys get +1/+0 for the turn, which is pretty good, right? I would be interested in playing that card sometimes, but I didn't quite get it. And I just misread the card. And same with Case of the Crimson Pulse. I thought it was discard 1, draw 2, and then when you empty your hand, on your next upkeep you'll discard your hand and then draw 2 cards and then sack the case. And those 2 cards are both very powerful, very fun to build around and play with in different ways. And I've had a great time playing them in Standard. I've been playing some NT with Case of the Crimson Pulse, Abe. You get to really, if you don't play all your cards, it's all right. NT will give you another, a redo as well.
Oh, I bet you deck real fast.
You move through your deck incredibly quickly. Luckily, Archfiend of Dross kills people even quicker.
That's just true.
What about yourself?
Okay. I've taken a look, and I'm going to say my favorite card so far, as of this moment, is Case of the Locked Hothouse, which is the green case where you can play an extra land on each of your turns, and then when you control 7 more lands, it's solved. And then I didn't realize you play lands off top of this library with this thing, but you get to play lands, creatures, and enchantments off top of your library, and you get 2 land drops. So I played against this in Limited when I was testing for the PT after the RC, and one of my teammates had it in their deck. And when I say that, they drafted it early, so they built the deck around it, but when I say that I thought the only way I could win was decking, I mean it. They literally, they must have played 6 cards a turn, because they were playing 2 lands off the top of their deck, casting the creatures, playing disguised creatures for cheap. They had 9 mana the next turn, then 11 mana, and they were just playing everything rolling off the top. And it was incredibly impressive, and it made me feel like I wanted to do that. So for right now, I'm going to say that's my favorite. Many close seconds that I've had good experiences with, just in terms of draft, which is where I've been experiencing the set a lot so far. But yeah, that's what I put it on right now.
Nice. Another way you can support the show is go to YouTube. You can go to Constructive Criticism on YouTube, and you can comment, and review there. Same on Spotify and Apple and all the other podcast places. That stuff really helps push us in the algorithm, and that's a great way to support the show for free. No YouTube comment this week, but we do sort of read one of those out on the show, so you can engage there and maybe get your question read on the show if you can't become a patron right now or just don't want to. You can follow us on Twitter at ccmtg to get updates on the show and various other things. You can follow Spencer, who isn't here today because he is sick, at Heezy Games. And Abe, where can they find you?
People can follow me over at twitter.com/morenothings. Still doing my song a day thing, which has been really fun. I really enjoyed it. And also, I guess, now becoming a book recommender, as I talked about the book a lot today, too. How about you, Mason?
You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. If you want to reach out for coaching, you can via there, or my email, masoneclark@gmail.com. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. You can find me on commentary this weekend for NRG for both the Standard and Pioneer events, so I'll be over there. And you can read my article on TCG Player this week, where I'll be writing about the RC when it comes to Modern. So if you're someone whose region still has an RC coming up, I know a couple of those are around, you might want to check that out as well. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of Constructivism, and we'll be back next week for another episode of CC MTG.